Good morning. We've been for so long virtual, and it's just so great to see everybody in person and to reconnect. And I'm here, as Eric said, representing the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, the federal agency that is tasked with helping to guide federal historic preservation policy. In that role, we work a lot with federal agencies. We also consult a lot with tribes on a government-to-government basis. We have some things to say, I hope, and expanding a role in preservation policy. But before I get too deep into federal policy, I actually wanted to pay respect to the place that we're in. So you don't have to be Christian or even religious to understand that this sanctuary, built 130 years ago, is a place that brings people together. This particular place had a really interesting past, and in fact, the way that people related to each other completely changed within this space due to a decision that was made around the half-life of this building. So about 60 years ago, in part because of construction that was happening here, the congregation removed the pews. And they realized that when they removed the pews, they could configure the space in a lot of different ways, including ways which enabled them to face each other. I raise this point to say, as preservationists, we might say, well, pews, they're a character-defining feature of a church. Why should we remove them? Don't ever change it. It can't possibly be better if it changes. But I think in this case, at least if you look at how the church speaks about that move, we would have been wrong. And in fact, we're here today. The church is alive today to rent us this space, very possibly because that physical change, that flexibility, helped them to see each other in new ways and strengthen their connections to each other. So as someone who was raised Catholic, I was taught that you can't think of the church as a building. You have to think of the church as the people who gather together. I would say that the preservation movement is really similar. So in the preservation movement, much like this church, it's the people who are gathered together that make the difference. So thanks to our hosts, we have a chance to look at each other just as deeply today as they do and ask each other, why are we here? What do we want to get out of these few days? So I'll tell you while I'm here, Eric gave you a little bit about my background, working at the state and local levels, working on training the next generation of preservationists, writing books on historic preservation law. Also someone who experienced land loss and displacement, my ancestors did. But I'm right here with you right now because I felt this call to serve, and I feel like the best way for me to serve is right here with all of you, helping to develop and push for policies that improve our quality of place. So what do I want for you to get out of these 2 days as you think about what you want to do while you're here? So first, I think you will be, most of you already are, but as knowledgeable as anybody in the country about preservation policy, at least at the federal level. So we'll hear from panelists today training us all on better ideas, better advocacy strategies, and I hope we all can learn from that. But second, to feel the passion about preservation, and by being together in this fellowship, to really energize each other and reinvigorate our I think, unifying goals to try to improve preservation policy. So now turning to preservation policy and the Advisory Council, I wanted to just touch on our legislative policies that we adopted last week. So this might sound like a bland document, but I'm hoping to use that as guiding my time on the Advisory Council because it is what the Advisory Council said we were going to advocate for. So a couple of things on our agenda that I know you're going to advocate for. The first is more funding for the Historic Preservation Fund. That's a necessity. We need more funding for SHPOs, TIPOs, for the Federal Preservation Program generally. I'm pretty sure you're also going to advocate for the Historic Preservation Tax Credit. That's on our agenda, that's on your agenda. I think that those are greatly aligned. I wanted to talk about 4 things on the Advisory Council's agenda as the federal policy setting, or at least policy guiding entity that I encourage you to think about today and in the future. The first one is integrating climate policy with historic preservation policy. So this can mean a lot of things. We've written a draft climate policy. I encourage you to look at it. We are considering adopting it as soon as May. But to us, that means investing in community planning for different scenarios. It means new or updated federal standards to allow us to fortify or protect our disaster-prone historic places. Fairer reviews for historic preservation tax credits to enable energy efficiency and renewable energy measures. And also doing a better job with post-disaster recovery of historic debris. So again, these policy statements by the council don't happen that often, so I really encourage you to check it out and provide some feedback. Second policy I wanted to mention that we're working on is supporting affordable housing creation in historic places. So I've asked ACHP staff this week to start looking at our 2007 policy on affordable housing so that we can have a written evaluation of it, so we can update it for with all the things that we've learned in the last 15 years. We cannot sit on the sidelines anymore when it comes to housing discussions. We preservationists are losing the PR war to the extent that it's a war. But we are seen as obstructionists. We cannot be that way anymore. And in fact, if I asked any one of you in this room, you would say, of course, preservation is a housing strategy. You would point to all of the things that you know work in your communities to move housing forward. So I think we need to take the lead on that, and the Advisory Council will be doing that. Third on our agenda, digitizing and mapping undocumented resources. Many of you have worked on this for a while. I'm meeting with CEQ and National Park Service leadership this afternoon separately, but just to make sure we establish those as priorities across the federal government. And then finally, making sure our move to streamline doesn't mean bulldozing our historic places. And so the Advisory Council, and I guess I hold that seat on the Federal Permitting Steering Council, and you can bet that I will be a strong voice there to make sure that don't streamline us out is heard loud and clear. So again, in addition to what you're advocating for here, I encourage you to think about the issues of climate change, affordable housing, digitization, and again, a don't streamline us out approach to federal permitting. I hope you fight for those this week, next week, beyond, and we will fight for them too. Lastly, I wanted to mention something that is not on your policy agenda this week, but I want to put on your radar screen also for you to take back to your state and local governments. And that is a policy we adopted last week on burial grounds, human remains, and funerary objects. Going back decades, we've seen many federal agencies and their licensees and permittees look the other way when finding human remains or even tribal artifacts, treating them in unspeakable ways and causing trauma to many, especially tribal nations, members of tribal communities, and members of Black communities. We cannot rely on people's good graces. So we have to enshrine in policy what we know is the right thing to do morally. We've done it at the ACHP through the adoption of this policy, and we will be implementing it in our Section 106 processes that federal agencies must follow. But I beg you, I encourage you to please look at this policy and take it to your state and local governments, because what we do at the Advisory Council doesn't affect private action, state action, local action. And so we need for you to check it out, carry it forward, adopt and adapt it for your own purposes. We are on holy ground, I guess, today, so we owe it to our ancestors, the holy ground that we're on, to do better. So these are the policy issues that get me riled up. I hope they get you riled up too, because we definitely need you to tell your congressperson that you are ready to fight for preservation. Federal policy is important because it trickles down to state and local approaches. So you being here, you expanding beyond state and local, and your state and local orbits, continuing for those of you already involved in federal policy to engage is really critically important. And I would say we are running out of time to get things right. I always feel like I'm running out of time. I feel like I'm running out of time, every day. So we're running out of time. Taking off my policy hat, I just want to say that this room right now is what historic preservation is all about. This fellowship, being here in person, fighting for places that matter, fighting for the policies that can help to protect the places that matter, in service of not only our relationship to our ancestors, our relationship to our past, our relationship to each other, but also our relationship to the future. And with the future in mind, I wanted to ask one last question of you to follow up on Russ's queries of the audience. How many students are in this room right now? That is great. That is great. So, as a professor, I would like to ask the non-students in this room to introduce themselves to the students when you get a chance at one of the breaks. We want for them to feel part of our fellowship. We want to train that next generation of preservationists to carry what we're doing forward. We're trying to work on that at the Advisory Council through office hours that I'm putting out very soon for our HBCU contacts, Salish Kootenai College, our tribal college, at UT San Antonio, the only Latino serving institution, I think, that has a historic preservation program and more. So we have internships, we've got webinars, we have our Section 106 trainings for everybody, but including students. And of course, all of those opportunities can be found on social media. So in addition to my big task list of topics today, reminding you, or at least introducing you perhaps to some of the policies that we have been working on, including the burial ground policy, I think I'm going to close there. And just to say, again, thank you to our hosts. Thank you to Nick Shippo. Thank you to Preservation Action for bringing us all together here today. And I look forward to convening with you all in more fellowship in the coming days.